On the outskirts of Taupō, a young couple are hard at work growing gourmet mushrooms, a far cry from their previous life in Auckland. Like many food-growing ventures, the idea for Forage came out of the pandemic. Producer Maggie Tweedie caught up with Benson Thomas and Hattie MacLennan at their indoor mushroom farm at Wairakei.
We escaped Auckland and Bronny was up to not much because he was working in construction and had too much time on his hands. We wanted to get out of Auckland anyway. We'd been there for 4 years and Bronny just started researching.
The idea was born during COVID when the pair began brainstorming a new way to make a living. Benson had a background in agricultural and applied science and was interested in horticulture. In 2020, he unearthed the mycology obsession. Hattie was working in HR and realised she could make the move to working remotely when they made the switch to rural living.
He wanted to own his own business before he was 30 and has always been great at growing things and sort of came across mushrooms and thought, let's do a bit more digging and see whether it's worth nudging. And then one thing led to another and here we are.
The pair have hustled to establish the site where they have a house and a large building for growing the fungi. In January 2023, the couple used the Thomas family's earthworks company to clear the paddocks, transforming 10 acres into land suitable for mushroom growing.
We're both somewhat rural, I guess, originally, so we thought, let's just give it a crack, give it a go. We're just growing oyster predominantly at the moment, so pink oysters, phoenix and Italian oyster mushrooms. We've dabbled in lion's mane just to sort of see how they go, but our biggest market is definitely the oyster mushroom. A lot of high-end restaurants like to use lion's mane. They're sort of fluffy and give a different texture to what you're normally used to. Like, it's certainly not something you look at and go, that's a mushroom. It almost looks like a completely different specimen from any kind of normal mushrooms, kind of crunchy if you fry it, or it's almost like a little topping to a dish.
And in terms of the different oyster mushrooms, do some of them have a slightly more nutritional edge to them?
Probably all levelled out in terms of nutritional value, but their flavour and texture vary quite a lot. Like pinker, they're a bit thinner, so they don't last as long, but they've got a really cool, exciting colour. They're sort of classed as like a nature's bacon. They've got the pink kind of, pop to them. Italian, they're, I guess probably your sort of standard oyster mushroom, and then phoenix is really good for like Asian dishes, broths, ramens, that sort of thing. They soak up heaps of flavour.
So what are your dreams with Forage and how's it growing over time?
Our first sale was back in April, and that sort of grew out to supermarkets based locally and regionally as well. But it's been really up and down. We've picked up in some seasons and then seen a massive dip in other seasons. So we're sort of just riding the wave and seeing where things go. We've got a lot of local restaurants. We've got a few restaurants down in the Hawke's Bay. We've actually got a couple in Bay of Plenty, which is cool as well. We originally had a bit of a contract with a supermarket based in Auckland, and that was at the time probably our biggest client. But probably looking back now, we're just got a nice little consistent local client base of restaurants.
What was it like, first bagging them all, putting them in this controlled environment, and then walking in one day, seeing that kind of growth? Do you remember that first moment?
I remember when definitely the pink oyster mushrooms really came to life, and I hadn't seen the volume all in one go in that shipping container, and I just remember walking in and just being like, this is just unbelievable. And I spent probably about 2 hours in there just taking photos and videos, because it's just something that you just never see and grow before your eyes, like within hours. It's almost like you could just have a time lapse there, and within half an hour they'd be almost fully grown. Like it's almost a little creepy, but also fascinating.
I head down to the 600 square metre warehouse, which is Forage HQ. Inside are a series of shipping containers full of climate-controlled, purpose-built equipment to meet Benson Thomas, who is busy bagging mushrooms.
That was the idea, is go as big as we could with what we had at the time and basically try and build into it. Before researching or doing any of this, I had a limitation of portobello mushrooms and button mushrooms, and didn't venture too far outside of that. Anything else was foreign and probably going to kill you. After digging in a fair bit, it became more and more interesting, and I saw an opportunity that there wasn't many other businesses growing wood-based mushrooms, which most people would call gourmet or exotic mushrooms. And I just decided that there's no one doing it in the Taupō region within a few hundred kilometres. Get a bit of a business going out of that, boots and all.
Boots and all. We step inside the shed and head over to a large set of shelves full of bagged substrate.
It's what they call master's mix. So 50% soy hulls, 50% pine pellets, and water.
Cool. And what stage do you put the water in?
So we basically add the dry matter to our mixer, which is a converted dairy feed trough, which is an auger put through the middle, and it plugs into the hydraulic bank on the tractor, which
Kind of stirs it up.
it stirs it up and shoots it out the front, which is basically the mix that we want to go into the bags. We have a flow meter for the water, which basically allows us to give us the perfect mix at the right ratios.
So it's an incredibly efficient process, and that's what you're probably needing to do if you're wanting to upscale, right?
Efficiencies are everything in this business, I'd say.
Yeah.
The more it costs to make, the more comes off your bottom end. So you've got to really trim down where you can, as well as trying to maximise the quality and the yield.
So let's have a look at some of these bags. Can you tell me where we would start to see the mushrooms? So right now what I'm looking at is a clear bag, and it's full of all of this beautiful nutrient-dense substrate. It's looking almost condensation inside.
That's right. So you want the right hydration in the right mix. So these are fully colonised bags. Essentially, the mycelium is fully taken over these bags and is breaking it down. They're still giving off a bit of a heat.
So they're hungry fellows.
They're hungry fellows, especially oysters. They give off a fair bit of heat when they are colonising and breaking down the substrate.
So like through the plastic itself, I can kind of see these shadowy figures coming through. Is that potentially the mushroom forming, or is that some kind of decomposition happening?
So the mushrooms are technically the fruiting body of the mycelium. So the mycelium is essentially the brains of the operation. It gets all the work done in the background.
So that's the network that's happening.
That's
below.
the network, yeah.
Okay.
So typically you'd see that below ground or through decaying wood in the forest or whatnot. So we just emulated that through bags and, turned it into a farm, really.
And so we've got all of these trays stacked up in slightly differing colours. Why is that?
So these are the ones that have just been through the lab. So I made these up today, basically putting the mycelium of whichever mushroom that we want to grow into the bag, seal it up, so there's no contaminants entering. They have a breathing patch. It's mushrooms and mycelium. As they break down the organic matter or the substrate, they give off a lot of CO2 and they have to breathe in oxygen, kind of like humans, and different to plants.
Yeah.
So they are essentially earlier in the process than the other bags here that we're looking at. So
Yeah, which are a lot lighter in colour.
that's right. So we've got to keep the process going so that we're basically planting every week, if that's what you want to call it, harvesting every week, got bags in incubation, so we've got a steady supply of mushrooms.
So you've always got some kind of incubation process happening, which must make it hard to take a summer break.
That's right. Just got to make it work.
We're right in the thrills of the early stages of the business, I guess.
Yeah, and it's all part of it. You've got to sort of dig it in when you need to, and you can't work to the normal holidays. You can stretch out the cycles or bring the cycles forward a wee bit so you can get a few days off in between, which we managed to get done this year, so
Cool.
success.
And what's it like working together?
Well, it's great. We have different areas,
Yeah.
so we don't butt heads. But no, Hattie's great. We work well together.
Should we go behind this door? What's behind this door?
This is the lab,
Okay.
so typically very clean room, and I purposely keep minimal equipment in, so that's less surface area, so less chance there's any contaminants in there. As you can see, lots of stainless steel, lots of alcohol spray, and not many other tools.
And what are you looking for in this lab?
This is where we do the transfer of the mycelium into the bags. If we want to have a look in this next room, I'll show you what goes in.
Okay, so it's quite humid in here.
It's actually quite dry in here.
Is it?
Yeah, but the smell of the oats, which have been sterilised, is what you're smelling.
Yeah.
And there's also some New Zealand lion's mane bags in incubation in here as well.
What kind of temperature are we wanting in here?
So this is set at 22 degrees, and in the winter time we need to keep it constant, so we've got a regular supply and steady growth of our grain spawn, which is a core ingredient to keeping the whole cycle going. So one of our grain bags will get split into 8, and they'll go into 8 of the big commercial bags, which we do. And one of those will do about 12 to 14 grow kits.
Oh, and here comes your little pooch.
Yeah.
This is your noble steed who follows you everywhere.
She's the brains of the operation. She's quality control. This is the fruiting room. I was going to build these the same as the lab and incubation room. However, I had a bit of a brainwave and decided that reefer shipping containers are insulated, movable, easy to clean, have fans built in, and can be heated or cooled. So it seemed like a really good idea. I had to do a few modifications, and it's pulled off. It works really, really well.
Brilliant. Should we go inside and have a look at what you're growing?
You're in luck. We've got a fair few mushrooms coming in and high humidity.
So this is a lot more humid than the other room.
Absolutely. Oysters love high humidity, typically 85 to 90% when they're pinning or when the mushrooms are just forming. And then we reduce it down in the later stages before we harvest.
And it smells like we're walking through the bush. Like, it's incredibly earthy right now. It's quite delicious.
It's great. So these are Phoenix oyster mushroom. They're a New Zealand native, and it's typically what we sell the most of. People enjoy the thick, juicy cap, their ability to soak up flavours when cooking, and they've got some good health properties to them as well.
Are they a bit more hard wearing?
They pack and travel better than the other ones, which are Italian and pink. So the pinks, they have a shorter shelf life, about 4 to 5 days. You might get a little bit longer depending on if they're really well looked after. The Phoenix will last 2 weeks typically. Chefs get about a couple of weeks out of them if they're not sold prior to. And Italians are pretty good as well, about 10 to 12 days if looked after. We only grow a small amount of the fresh pink oyster commercially, and that's just due to the shelf life, so we only source that locally. We don't ship that outside of Taupō.
Only the best for Taupō.
That's right.
Forage also sells mushroom growing kits to customers.
After a few months, maybe 6 months, growing fresh mushrooms and scaling up quite quick from roughly 30 kilos to half a tonne a week, we decided we needed some diversity and looked into the avenue of mushroom grow kits. Essentially a box that you purchase online or from a wholesaler that we sell to, which is a ready-to-go kit. Instructions on the box, very simple. Remove the front panel, cut the X, spray with water. 6 days you should have mushrooms.
So it says remove, spray and forage away.
Yeah, it's quite clever. One of my mates from Hawke's Bay did all the design work, and he just tacked that in there, and we kept it on there, so it's quite cool. Trying to make it as self-explanatory as possible. Yeah.
It's very logical. I love it. And I think that's kind of what you need to do in order to cut through and get people to be inspired to plant and to cultivate their own food.
Yeah, that's right. We found after COVID there was quite a trend of people wanting to grow their own food. Maybe it was a spark of just being tied up and, growing veggies, and it brought a bit back. So, yeah, it's proven quite popular. Yeah.
What was it like heading into the summer season? Were things ramping up for you on that front?
We decided to pull pin on some of our bigger markets. We were sending 300-400 kilos a week into Auckland, which are going to largely Asian supermarkets.
Okay.
And it was a strong market during the winter. During the summertime, there was some other growers essentially came into play that are growing outdoors, and the volume just drove the price down, and we decided not to continue supplying into that market
because it wasn't viable for you.
Yeah, the price dropped, and our cost of production is a bit higher than than the other growers, I guess, that started doing this in the summertime and growing outdoors. So we decided to pull pin on that market, yeah.
What are some of the other challenges that you've faced in the last few months as a small business owner?
I'd say the biggest challenge we've faced is having to deal with the market swing and obviously the other growers coming into play and upsetting that. It is, I guess, part of business, and we've had to saddle up, strap on and keep going. But yeah, I think there could be a few regulatory things that could change which would help New Zealand growers. These are the growers, the blocks which we make here, the blocks that they are growing on are made in China. So I had a few questions about the agricultural waste coming into New Zealand by the container load, etc., and the labelling of them being New Zealand mushrooms when they were technically manufactured in China but fruited in New Zealand. So there's a few challenges there.
So all of the processes that we just went through when we were going through all of these different rooms, which were done on New Zealand soil, you're saying that they were actually happening in China, but then exported here and then grown in air quotes, actually in New Zealand.
Yeah, and that's I struggled to get my head around that, especially with the tight biosecurity rules in New Zealand. So all the substrates all from China, and it's agricultural waste like corn husks and wheat bran and bits and pieces. And so they are basically doing the same process as what we do here, using a different mix. But yeah, so Chinese manufacturing is obviously a lot cheaper than what we can do it for here. So our
and
cost,
the labour too.
So our cost of production is significantly higher than overseas, especially China. So it's quite hard to compete, and yeah, so it's quite tough as a grower having to compete with that. And I looked into potentially doing that and bringing them in myself, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It's I feel like it's a major backward step and pretty hard to do as a New Zealander, you know.
So where do you see forage produce heading in the future?
We're going to continue to grow it domestically with the fresh mushrooms. We'll keep the grow your own kits going and may diversify into a few more species as well, as we've had requests from other clients saying, can we do other ones? So the other big thing that we're looking at is doing a value-added food item, looking at doing a collab with a well-recognised company into dumplings and alike, so gourmet dumplings, and also looking at supplying them into chefs. So looking at doing a really high-quality dumpling, slightly bigger than your average size to fit the Western palate, meet the chef market, and also please the population.
Here we go. Pardon? Oh, it's down by the little veggie garden.
All this talk of mushrooms has made me hungry. Hattie cooks up a plate of delicious oyster mushrooms and runs through her favourite recipe.
Right, so we're just keeping it very simple this afternoon. All we're going to do is just your classic oyster mushrooms, bit of garlic, bit of home grown thyme. The garlic's actually just your elephant garlic down the Hawke's Bay, get amongst if you can. And then just a little bit of lemon, salt and pepper, and you're good to go.
Simple's best with the oysters. Cast iron pan makes a big difference. The oyster mushrooms can handle higher heat than your normal supermarket mushrooms.
The good things about these puppies is that they soak up the flavour as well. They don't shrink like your normal butter mushrooms. So you get all that buttery, lemony, thymy, salt and peppery goodness.
So what are you throwing on now?
Just the leftover thyme. And then we'll just whack them on the plate and Bob's your uncle.
Treat them like a normal mushroom, good for breakfast, steak, eggs, roast, side dish, pastas, risottos, very versatile. Oh, look at that, soaking up the flavour.
If you're feeling a little bit exotic, you could just whack on a bit of this chili garlic parsley oil at the end, but not for the faint-hearted, so take your picks.
Perfect.
Oh yeah.
Hattie, MacLennan and Benson Thomas of Forage, cooking up some of their mushrooms grown on the outskirts of Taupō for our producer, Maggie Tweedie.